Hey there, race fans. This is Nathan Brown, Motorsports Insider with the Indianapolis Star. We've got a great penultimate round edition of the Inside Line here to talk about the second to last race on the calendar that happened this past weekend at the Milwaukee Mile. Just one race left to go at Nashville Superspeedway, and breaking all of that down, looking ahead to Nashville Superspeedway, talking about all of the crazy, silly season nuggets that have cropped up here in the last week or two. Joining me, as always, is my co-host Joey Barnes. Joey, we saw a really awesome oval race at the Milwaukee Mile, a race that not only was well raced, had some great competition down to the wire. It was well attended, a lively crowd. I was there on the ground. You saw some notable cheers and some pretty raucous celebrations there when Christian Rasmussen was doing some donuts on the front stretch that had all the feelings of, certainly outside the Indy 500. I think the best oval race that we have had of the year, when you look at every aspect of it. What were you taking away watching that race down the stretch, and what stood out to you initially when we saw Christian Rasmussen make that final pass with about 13 laps to go on Alex Palou?
Yeah, it was certainly a race of the year candidate, right? I mean, just the side by side racing. You got a little bit of side pod rubbing from time to time, which was good. I thought the tire deg was obviously massive, made a huge difference. The fact that we saw earlier in the race, Marcus Armstrong tried to stay out on just 20 lap old tires compared to everybody else and just shot to the back. I don't know if Christian Rasmussen was doing a little bit of a rain dance to have the weird 30-second pop-up shower that allowed him to come to pit road. And it almost felt like this was a race that Alex Palou, who on pole was extremely dominant throughout the day. I think he led like 199 laps or something like that. This was one of those weird moments where it almost seemed, and this is maybe a little harsh, but it almost seemed, because of what we saw with Marcus Armstrong earlier, that it was common sense to come to pit lane, whether it didn't matter if you had 20 laps left, 30 laps left, even 10 laps left. The delta was so big on the tire wear that I just looked at that and kind of was baffled that they beat themselves. It just looked like a race that Alex Palou could have easily walked off and won. But instead, Christian Rasmussen dancing on the marbles, dancing on the outside lane, really treading thin between whether he's going to go checkers or wreckers. And, he comes home with it. And, credit to him. I know on our last episode, we talked about Portland, and I notably had mentioned he drove like a jackass. He drove like a badass on this past Sunday. So good on him. Good on Ed Carpenter Racing, who had a great day with Rossi also finishing fourth. I thought he was going to actually be able to just chip away a little bit on McLaughlin and get the podium there at the end, but just not enough there to do it. But overall, just a fantastic race, fantastic attendance. I mean, like I said, race of the year candidate for me.
The choice there at the end with Alex Palou was, as you mentioned, really surprising to me. When you're sitting in that seat, I think he made the exact choice, say, if this championship was still alive, that I would have expected him to make. And it's one of those things where maybe as you're kind of thinking this through and weighing your odds, maybe you'd rather get beaten by someone being more risky than you and overtaking you, kind of like essentially what happened, rather than, say they make the choice to take tires and then no one else does, and they just get totally caught off guard and surprised by that, and they drop back. I mean, I think there were like 17 cars on the lead lap. So, I mean, theoretically, if you're the only person to take tires, which would, I don't think there's any situation that no one would have done that, especially those cars toward the back of the lead lap where you're quite literally not risking almost anything. You say he goes and drops back to 12th and he's only able to make his way back up to, 8th or 7th or something like that. You're probably really kicking yourself there. And it's going to be a different feeling than leading 199 laps and being first in that instance and eventually falling back to second. Neither is great. But I was a little surprised that they didn't roll the dice there, just under the it just didn't seem like a point in the race where where many or any people would or should not take new tires. I mean, we saw that margin where the fall off typically was right around that 20 to 25 lap mark, kind of about halfway through a stint or so, maybe even a little bit less. And so I think Rossi maybe kicked off the pit sequence on lap 192, if memory serves me right. And then a lot of cars were starting to come through on once you got to like lap 195, 196. And I think the caution came at lap 209. And so even the folks that had waited a good amount were, you had probably 15 laps of green flag running on these tires. And then you go through the yellow flag laps that don't do much, but it's not nothing at the same time. And I mean, clearly, as we saw, 14 of the 17 lead lap cars took them, and that was literally everyone from fourth on down. You wonder a little bit when you're the leader, probably, hey, if I do something, is everyone else just going to do the opposite? And there probably would have been a handful of folks that would have said, yes, thank you very much. I will take that top spot in the order and just roll the dice, especially if you're a guy like Scott McLaughlin or a Joseph Newgarden who's searching for the first win of the year. Maybe in that sense, doing what Palou doesn't do is the risk that you take instead of risking to potentially fall back in the order and take new tires, which they obviously didn't do. I felt like what we've seen from that team all year, just making right decision after right decision. They didn't have a championship to risk. All that was on the line was Palou's ability to continue to go and hunt down an opportunity to tie the single season wins mark held by AJ Foyt and Allen's a senior at 10 wins. He was going to have to win both of the last two races of the year in Milwaukee and Nashville. Those are pretty long odds. But I don't know. Hindsight is 2020 and all this stuff. And Alex is making that decision, not knowing what other people are doing. So it's hard to say truly in the moment what the best decision was, but I have to think if you're in their position and you're looking at, hey, if I'm Pato O'Ward or I'm Alexander Rossi or I'm Christian Rasmussen or other folks that are a little bit farther back, they're almost certainly going to take tires and not necessarily, maybe you drop back to fifth. Maybe there are a handful of guys that are just on the radio saying we are going to do whatever Alex Palou doesn't do. But when you've led at that point, 180 laps or whatever, I was a little surprised that they didn't take that risk and feel like even if we lose 4 spots, these new tires are going to be worth it to be able to go and try to hunt those people down.
Yeah, no, 100%. And, the thing that was kind of interesting also is like, and I think this is an important point to make, is the fact that Christian Rasmussen won that race just as much as Alex Palou lost that race. Mm-hmm. And I look at it and there's something about the way that we see Alex Palou drive. It never looks like he's on the edge. It never looks like he's dancing. It looks like he's always in control. With the way that Christian drove, he was on the edge and you could see it. And I'll tell you this, those are the kind of performances, those are the kind of drives that you can visually see that bring new fans, that excite you as a fan. Those are the kind of drives that honestly, I think we've been missing a little bit in IndyCar. Everybody, when you hit it right on the setup and everyone else doesn't, you can, I know you're probably hitting at 10 tenths. I'm not going to sit there and question anybody not pushing it at 10 tenths, but there's just a difference of that. You almost see like the hunger just like be transparent throughout the entire drive itself. Like, was it at times a little dangerous? Because he was far and away like just coasting and could have easily just packed it in and coast, but instead he's going through lap traffic like a madman and really still dancing with it and kind of cost himself a little bit more time that actually helped Palou reel him in, 4 or 5 tenths there towards the last lap or two. But I think the other thing to bring up is that when you and I started this podcast at the beginning of the year, and maybe it's shame on us, Christian Rasmussen wasn't a name that we had talked about as far as first-time winners are concerned. We were thinking, is it going to be Connor Daly? Is it going to be David Malukas? There's a plethora of other. Louis Foster might sneak one in because we saw the RLL performance start to increase at Road America. Not one time did we think or even point out, like Christian Rasmussen, former Indy Next champion, coming in here, the ECR group continuing to raise their profile with Rossi, with the backing they got over the offseason. We were kind of wondering what would happen with Renus leaving, or I guess leaving would be a gentle word to say, but no longer with the team. And we saw the performances that they were pushing at the early part of the season with Dale Coyne. There was so much here that it's almost like we completely forgot that Rasmussen had this capability. I mean, part of it's because we hadn't seen it, right? We hadn't seen the flashes to this extent. And you could have argued on Sunday that David Malukas, along with Connor Daly, they were in the thick of it and had situations that took themselves out of it, whether that was that pit road miscue for David or just bad stops or track position for Connor at times. And the other thing that I thought was kind of unique to this race was it was refreshing to see that clean air didn't matter as much as fresh tires. Mm-hmm. I mean, so many times we've seen in the past that clean air just neutralizes everything, that it becomes the buffer that you can't get by. And I think we finally hit a point, specifically with Milwaukee. I don't think we've hit a point everywhere, but I think with Milwaukee in particular, maybe Gateway, you could put the other asterisk next to with this, is that we found a package here that works, that track position can help some things, but tires can overcome just about anything.
Yeah, I mean, I think when you talk about races where clean air is important, I mean, I think back to Pato Award and the Arrow McLaren team's decision on when they pitted in, toward the end of that race one at Iowa Speedway, where Joseph Newgarden had led all those laps from pole, and Pato was trying to fight back from second place, and all they really did was make the decision to pit. I think it was 2 laps before Joseph did, and Pato got into clean air, had a great in lap and great out lap, and that was the difference on being able to overtake Joseph. Joseph got up to him, got up pretty close to his rear wing a couple times, but he was never able to pass him. And that was just not what we saw here. And that's what makes IndyCar racing on short ovals especially so exciting. When you have that tire deficit, when you've got folks that are trying to weigh, tire stints versus fuel stints, and whether you run all out and make an extra stop, or whether you try to, cut a stop, and how you're managing where the yellow flags come out, and the strategy decisions that you make. I know there's another race, maybe kind of similar to the Rasmussen, just carving through the field on new tires. You probably will remember that's even better than I do, but memory serves me right. There's a Ryan Hunter-Reay cutting through the field at Iowa several years back, where he just took new tires, cut through everyone, and made up a massive deficit toward the end of the race, and was able to do that. That stuff is so exciting, and is something in that IndyCar racing has when it's at its best that you just don't see in any other racing series.
Yeah, and whenever Rasmussen was cutting through the field like that, you're kind of wondering, is he overdoing it? Is he pushing over the tire a little bit more, to the point that he's going to run out of tire to have enough time to catch Alex Palou? And sure enough, those questions were answered. But good first win for him. Great win for ECR. I mean, that organization has certainly been starving for one for a while. So it was good to see them get that out of the way. And going to Nashville, we'll see if they can replicate that. And certainly you got to look at them now as a serious contender for there. But
well, the one thing that really stood out to me when I was kind of thinking through the big picture aspect of what Christian did, that is really the only time I think this season when Alex Palou has had the car, or has even been one of a couple cars, and where he has been in the lead and had the race seemingly under control, and someone has gone out and beaten him. He's only won 8 times, and we've had 16 races this year. So yes, there have been 8 races where he has not won, and I think he's finished on the podium when he's not won 1, 2, now 4 times. So he's got 12 podiums this year. So and I mean, we can go through them. Long Beach was never really in control. That was Kyle Kirkwood's race through and through. Mid-Ohio, he gave that race away. I really don't think Scott Dixon was going to catch him. So that was one where, as we were talking about at the start of the pod, Christian Rasmussen won this as much as Alex Palou and the 10 team kind of lost it a little bit. That was definitely a lot more, and the Alex Palou gave that one away camp. Portland may be a little similar, but that never really felt like a race that Alex had under control. He was among a short list of guys, with Will Power and with Christian Lundgaard there down the stretch, where you felt like they were kind of battling in a group, but I never felt like that was Alex's race to lose, or a one that he was far and away the best car. Alex had the, from a, overall standpoint, car to car, same to same, Alex, I think, had the best car. I think if he had taken new tires, I think if everyone, up front had taken new tires, I don't think there's any way that he gets past there and, down the stretch. And ultimately that's a thing where he's a little bit of a sitting duck, and the team took a little bit of a conservative decision, and ultimately the race gets away from him. But we really haven't seen anyone this year other than Christian Rasmussen take Alex wheel to wheel in a race winning situation where Alex is in first place and actually get by him. And I mean, that move where those guys are going into turn 4, where Rasmussen eventually wins the drag race down the front stretch. I mean, Alex was doing everything he could to put Christian on the edge. I mean, you'd have to.
Him, yeah.
He pinched him, in a very much a way that we don't see Alex Palou really ever drive, probably part because he's very rarely challenged. But that was a move where Alex Palou gave Christian Rasmussen everything he could while still being fair and not just running him into the wall. And Christian stayed in it, had great car control, knew exactly where that limit was, didn't catch any oversteer or understeer, didn't get into the wall, held his line, and then just won the race down the stretch and made the pass and made it cleanly. It was one of those things, we've heard so much chatter over the last couple of weeks about Rasmussen and the aggressive style in which he drives and how he's really not endearing anyone in the field. I mean, I've talked to so many drivers in the wake of Sunday's win, and they said, they'll publicly say props to Christian. He was more aggressive than we are. He put it on the line more than we did. They made the great strategy call, and they were right there at the end to make the move and get it done. But privately, you will hear drivers talk about how so much of what Christian does really irks them and is unsettling, and they don't feel like it's necessarily the way that IndyCar cars should be raced. But it was I don't know what the word is. I don't know that refreshing is necessarily the word, but I really took note in the way in which Ed Carpenter stood behind his guy at the podium in the press conference on Sunday after the race. He said, "We have not told Christian to do anything differently. We want him to continue driving the way he drives because, quite frankly, it's allowed in the rules, as we've seen, the way in which his move on Connor at Portland wasn't penalized, like it or not, that the way in which he drives more often than not is allowed. Now it left him crashing a couple of times as a rookie last year. But it does seem like he has, large in part, learned those lessons, and he drives for himself. There are some drivers out there that will make business decisions and pull out of moves and say, I'm going to live to fight another day. And Christian's just not that guy. For better or for worse, he is aggressive. He seems he drives with a little Joseph Newgarden. I feel like in terms of kind of his short oval. I mean, Joseph is an incredible race car driver. Christian is not at his level of, certainly at his resume, but just the way that Joseph sneakily, kind of pinches guys or runs them up into a second lane and kind of takes an arcing move into corners just to hold on to his position. I see some of that in Christian, and I will be really interested to see how his career, particularly on short and, and mid-range ovals, continues to progresses into next year.
Yeah, we saw Joseph try to make one of those defensive moves on Rossi at Milwaukee in the closing stages, and it led to a side pod bump and Rossi getting by and Joseph going backwards.
And the same thing with Kiffin Simpson too. I thought it was, I mean, quite frankly, hilarious. Kiffin was, I mean, certainly the stewards didn't see Kiffin doing anything uncouth, and yes, he was fighting to stay to not get lapped by Joseph, which some drivers will have some different positions on. But what Kiffin was doing was allowed by the rules. Joseph was not already one lap ahead of him, so he didn't have to follow anything from a blue flag standpoint. And that race went yellow, and Joseph drove up to the side of Kiffin and gives him this emphatic finger wag, which I have to wonder if a young Joseph Newgarden would have been doing the exact same thing that Kiffin was doing. And I, frankly found it a little hilarious and ironic, but that is what it is.
Yeah. So just to put a bow on this, because we got a next spicy segment that we got to get to. We've got Christian Rasmussen winning in his 30th IndyCar start, Palou second, McLaughlin cleaning up the podium, Rossi fourth, Pato Award with his 5th place finish secures 2nd place in the championship, the highest spot that he's finished in his career to date. Christian Lundgaard was 6th, Joseph Newgarden 7th, Malukas 8th, Dixon 9th, Marcus Armstrong 10th. I do want to just touch on one small bit, and I'm not gonna hang on it long because we do need to move on to the next segment. But with this win, Christian Rasmussen has put himself 12th in points and within striking distance of finishing in the top 10 in the championship standings. Incredibly unique. He moves past Rinus VeeKay in the standings, his former teammate, who was flirting with the top 10 in the championship. And Christian Rasmussen can not easily, but certainly in a conversation I'd say he could probably get up to, he can get up to 10, he can get up to 9th maybe, but 10th is the more likely spot, which is currently occupied by Scott McLaughlin. So we'll see what happens.
I think he sits 3rd. This is something that I don't think we actually got a document on, but I was doing some mental math on. I think Rasmussen might have accumulated the 3rd most points on ovals this year out of any drivers. I think just behind Palou and Pato, which is it's just one of those stats that, like, it's just part of the picture. But I mean, that really tells you just how strong and consistent a driver that Rasmussen has been on ovals this year. And it's been a really impressive development and growth to be able to see.
Yeah, no, for sure. So moving to this next segment, it's highlighting the guy who was dominant but ended up finishing 2nd, and it was from a story that you had written on the IndyStar and had to do with Red Bull Racing, kind of sniffing around a little bit with the Alex Palou situation. Alex Palou is obviously no stranger to F1-esque drama, as he's still in the middle of a legal battle with McLaren. But the fact that Red Bull sources told you, that Red Bull Racing is kind of sniffing around a little bit, and Chip Ganassi, I don't remember an announcement happening, but Chip Ganassi effectively saying he's our guy on a long-term deal, as if he had just re-upped at some point this year for an even longer contract. I don't know if that's, we haven't seen anything on that. We hear what Chip says. But what can you tell us based on kind of, one, from that story, but 2, like, if there's anything additional you've heard since then?
Sure. So I will try to keep this as abbreviated as I can. This is a topic where, I mean, it's one of those stories where I really wish that some fans or members in the paddock, not everyone's a media expert or has a journalism degree. There's just some levels of, like, media literacy that I just wish folks understood a bit more, because I think all of this would make a lot more sense, or wouldn't be taken maybe the way that lots of folks have taken and run with it. The basis of what I reported in that story that you mentioned there that ran on Monday morning was that folks within Red Bull have expressed interest to folks outside the organization in regards to Alex. So as I said in there, Alex publicly and privately has said that he has not gotten any outreach from folks at Red Bull recently. Recently is an important term there. I can get to that in a second. His manager, Roger Yasukawa, has said that he has not had any conversations with folks at Red Bull. And members of Chip Ganassi Racing, which Chip obviously referenced yesterday, have had no conversations with anyone at Red Bull about the F1 team being able to obtain Alex's services in the future. So I saw a lot of headlines yesterday or some tweets from media members that referenced that Chip shot this rumor down. I think that is a bit misplaced, because what I have reported, unless folks get Red Bull sources on or off the record, or on the record or on background, who say definitively that they have not had any conversations with anyone in the motorsport world inquiring about Alex's situation, then what I reported has not been debunked, I guess I would say. What Chip said yesterday in his media conference call that he had, that was went in lots of different directions, but in terms of Alex, he repeated the line he has said for a long time, which is that Alex continues to tell him that he is happy. He's got a family here, they've got a home now, he's putting down some roots, he's obviously on a multi-year deal. And Chip continues to say, I think he also said it on the Fox practice, one of the practice broadcasts on Saturday. Townsend Bell asked the question, and I imagine he was hearing some of the same stuff that I'd been hearing, others in the pack had been hearing. Chip said that Alex has given him no indication, that he wants to leave, and Chip continues to take him at his word. I asked Chip directly yesterday on that media call, and I asked Chip, do you have any indication or any belief that Alex will be driving next year anywhere other than the number 10 Chip Ganassi Racing Honda? And he said no. So where we stand on this, and I think there will be more to talk about here in a couple days. We haven't, I know Jenna Fryer from the Associated Press, I think, talked to Alex yesterday. We're taping this podcast on Wednesday midday, so that would be on Tuesday around probably when Chip talked. And I think all Alex said there was that he had not spoken with anyone at Red Bull, which is exactly what I had reported on Monday. The crux, the important question, and the one that is going to get asked on Friday when Alex is next available to the media, and the all-important answer to it is, if Red Bull gave you an offer and reached out to you, even if they have not reached out to you yet, would you be at all interested, or would you consider taking a ride there? We have heard Alex say, and again, I think these words have gotten a little bit turned around by either some fans that just have either remembered things wrong or didn't read the entire story or misread it. Alex has had lots of quotes. He's been asked about Formula One countless times over the last couple of years for many reasons. But what I felt like was the most definitive, in-depth, kind of open book interview that he had given on a topic was when Jenna Fryer of the AP and I sat down with him the morning after the 500, and we kind of in a roundabout way got to the F1 topic. Jenna and I, kind of got to where, we were saying, look, you're well on your way to your 4th championship. You've now won a 500. There's so many people out there that see when you reach these milestones in IndyCar, they immediately think, well, okay, the next challenge on a race car driver's, bucket list or the docket, or the next thing that they should go do to try and challenge themselves is go to Formula One. And hey, Alex, I know this was a desire of yours a couple years ago. It doesn't necessarily seem like it is right now. Why has that changed? And he talked to us about how for him, he has no desire to, be famous. It's not about the money. It's about working with an organization that you feel like is really a family, and, having a great setup for his actual family, his wife and his daughter here in the Indianapolis area. And he's got chances to, compete for history here in IndyCar. And that's something that shouldn't be overlooked. But he also said there are not many seats in Formula One that I would consider leaving the 10 car. He did not say there are no seats. He said there are not many. We already know he's never going back to McLaren, so you can eliminate those. And so ultimately, I think this all comes down to when Alex says there are not many seats, is a Red Bull seat one that he would consider? Is it, if it's not Red Bull, is it just, Mercedes and Ferrari? And he's not going to go and sit there and say on Friday when we talk to him in Nashville, he's not going to go through every seat in Formula One and say, well, I'd leave Ganassi for this, but I wouldn't leave for that. That's not what we're going to get into. But I don't think anyone in any reporting that I have seen this week has truly gotten to the bottom of this F1 thing is not happening. Without question, it is not an option. And ultimately, that would just come down to what Alex says in public. He has a history of saying some things in public and doing some things differently in private. He would certainly not be the first athlete or member of the sports community to do the same. So that's not a knock on Alex. But I don't feel like at this time that we have the ability to say whether this is going to go either way. I know, Chip and him have both said they have not heard from those parties, which is no different from what I wrote on Monday, but we'll be really interested to hear how he addresses that question when we get there this weekend, because that's ultimately, I think, going to kind of determine where this storyline goes.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, it's tough to ignore anything if Red Bull does come calling. But equally, there's also a hex or a stigma or whatever you want to call it on the second seat that's alongside Max Verstappen. I mean, Daniel Ricciardo is probably the closest anyone came to really pushing to the levels, and that was with a young Max Verstappen. I mean, you see where
and Checo may be there Checo for a year or two. Checo was maybe the most successful when Max was at his championship caliber peak, but still we're only talking about winning like 2 races a year in a season where Red Bull like far and away had the best car. And those races might have even been, I don't have the results in front of me, but I almost want to say that like those 2 races that Perez won in 2023, I want to say that Max had like some sort of issues in those, and that Checo not inherited those, but I don't feel like those were races where, and maybe I'm remembering this wrong, so if I am, I apologize, but I don't feel like at least one of, if not both of those races weren't ones where like Max was running at full tilt and Checo was running at full tilt and Checo was just able to beat him. But that was also the season where Max won like 15, what was it? Like, I mean, an insane number of races that year, like somewhere between 15 and 20, and set those marks in F1 history. So like even doing that wasn't like the most impressive, it wasn't like he was, by no means was Checo going toe to toe with Max. He was a solid driver in what was far and away the best car on the grid that year. So you're right. No one is, it's been a weird thing for that organization where it just seems like they have a car that's so tuned to what Max wants and needs that no one else has been really able to figure that out.
And you have to wonder a couple of things here. And this is what goes through my mind when I hear, the situation as it is. And obviously there's so many more details to know. So a lot of what I'm about to say is more speculative than anything, but it's a situation where, does Red Bull change a little bit of their business model with Christian Horner now no longer with the team, the organization? Does it become a situation where there isn't a clear number one and a clear number two? Are we going to start to race a little bit more like the way McLaren has treated Piastri and Lando Norris? What is the dynamic of that look like? Are we only going to grab Alex Palou because we're actually looking at building something with him, because we're kind of convinced that Max is going to honor his contract, but once he's done with his contract, he's gone, he's out the door. And then equally, I mean, Yuki Tsunoda, there's a lot of ties to Honda with Yuki. So does he go to another Honda powered F1 team because we know Ford's coming in at Red Bull? And does this put a situation where Yuki's exploring other options outside of F1, which, I mean, who knows? It could effectively be a ride swap with Palou in that situation. But without getting too deep in the weeds on who the replacement would be for a seat that's, to our knowledge, locked in for an extended amount of time. There's one thing that I think is important. It's, yes, we've seen that Alex kind of had his hiccup of signing 2 contracts at the same time, ending up with 2 teams at the same time, kind of in this weird situation. Is a different management team that was also safeguarding him, or I don't know if safeguarding is the right word. Managing him would be the better word, and whatnot. And I know there was some controversy with that. Through all of this, he got Roger Hasegawa back. That was a big part of it. And then the other end of it, I would say, is the fact that, his allegiance to Chip Ganassi Racing was tested, because when this all happened and there was a fallout to some degree, and he still had to race a full year with everybody having and winning the championship that year, by the way, with the expectation that he was going to be gone up until August, I believe it was. And it was like a few races to go. And he had to earn everyone's trust back. He had to earn everyone's trust back within that 10 team. And he's done that. And I guess effectively what I'm saying is that if he does leave, it's going to have to be for a clear-cut good seat in F1, because I don't know how you come back from it if you waffle again. I don't know how you come back from it to reignite trust. Now, winning fixes a lot of things, but it took a lot of time for those relationships to be repaired. And I think that's one thing. There's a greater sense of, I'm not thinking always about the next step of my career. It's, I really care about winning. I care about the brotherhood we have on the 10 team, because effectively it's what they are. And so that, again, speculative on my part, these are just what I see with my eyes and how I'm interpreting things and the way that I'm trying to fit the puzzle in my head. But that's just kind of how I kind of see things at the moment.
Yeah, it's some other things to keep in mind here too that I think are important. I don't think either side has said this publicly, but I understand that Alex has an out clause in his contract with Chip Ganassi Racing. This latest contract, which is kind of interesting when you consider what Alex and Chip went through on the last contract, where he toyed with trying to and I mean, twice signing a contract to leave Chip Ganassi Racing for an organization that has a Formula One team. That part of this dispute is whether he was actually promised that if a Formula One ride would be available or not. That's kind of one of the cruxes of this big lawsuit that continues to go on in UK commercial court. But as I understand it, Alex still has an out clause for Formula One in his Chip Ganassi Racing deal. That court documents have actually said runs through to the end of 2026. So unless you were mentioning there, Chip did mention, I think mentioned on the media call yesterday, and also mentioned it over the weekend on TV that Alex is on a long-term deal. He's in a long-term deal, but unless something has changed since those documents in court have been filed, I believe he would technically be a free agent unless there's been some sort of extension that has been added on, which you would assume would be made public by the team, because they would want to, kind of just profess and make it loud and clear that Alex is theirs and no one should even come snooping around. But
it's also the team that doesn't tell us Scott Dixon's contract situation. It's just kind of a foregone conclusion that it's a year-to-year deal.
That is true. And I guess technically speaking, I think the reason that we found out, well, I mean, we knew that Alex was coming up on the final year of his deal when all of this stuff was happening in 2023 in August, when he eventually decided to heel turn and say that he was going to stay at Ganassi. And then in the process of him clinching that championship after he won Portland, I think it was Chip that maybe both said on TV and in a media conference that they had actually signed Alex to a new 3-year deal, or signed him to a new deal. And then I was able to find out that it was a new 3-year deal from going through the court documents in that ongoing lawsuit. But so yes, you are right. We don't necessarily, I don't necessarily know what approach they would take on that. I could see it, I guess, going both ways. But what I was getting at there is, as I understand it, Alex basically just has a buyout number where someone would have to come with a check and say, hey, Chip Ganassi, this is the amount for the buyout on my contract. Thank you very much for everything. But as I understand it, I think if someone were to offer that type of money, and again, I don't know if we're talking $3 million, $5 million, $10 million, $15 million. I don't know what it is. But as I understand it, I think that's pretty much all it would take. And Chip did also say in the press conference yesterday, which I thought was a really interesting quote and, a really honest one from him. He has said, I think before, and also said on Tuesday, I am not one to stand in someone's way if this is what he wants to do. And I believe that. I truly think, and that's probably part of the reason why that clause is in Alex's contract to begin with. Ultimately, if Alex wants to race in Formula One, I think Chip is going to, I don't necessarily know that Chip has a mechanism to fight that. He might not be super thrilled. Many of us in the paddock believe that Chip or Chip Ganassi Racing or someone affiliated with Chip Ganassi Racing is backing Alex from a financial standpoint in his ongoing lawsuit, which has, I believe, already accumulated millions of dollars in legal fees, not to mention the fact that he's being sued for more than $30 million in UK commercial court by McLaren and Air McLaren. Ultimately, if a judge finds him liable for a large sum of that, Alex doesn't have that kind of money. And I believe someone in his corner, let's say, will be there to help figure that process out. So that wouldn't be an easy thing to do if you're Alex and you're saying, not only do I want to go to F1, but is there now someone else at, say, Red Bull that's willing to stand behind me, assuming, because Chip is obviously not going to be there to continue paying legal fees for a driver who's no longer on his team. So that's part of all of this. I think not only would Red Bull probably have to buy Alex out of his deal, but they would probably need to say either try to work with McLaren to reach some sort of a settlement, which McLaren certainly doesn't seem like they want to have happen. But then they would need someone that would be willing to put the money forward to be able to back him if things really go sideways for him there. So there's a lot to all of this. But I think this decision really ultimately comes down to if this matriculates into an offer, which again is not what anyone I don't think has reported, certainly not what I have reported. It's just that Red Bull has begun a process of sniffing around and figuring out what Alex's situation is, what his contract is, what the lawsuit entails, what he might be, trying to figure out what he might be interested in. Again, maybe without confronting him or his management directly head on yet. But that's what I believe has gone on. Ultimately, this decision will come down to, if we get to Red Bull actually offering him a ride, does Alex want to continue his pursuit here to be the greatest driver in IndyCar history? Or is there still an element of Formula One in what I think you would say and arguably is one of the top 4 teams on the grid right now? Is there something where giving that, let's say 2 years to check out and see, hey, by the middle of year 2, am I seeing progress? Am I starting to get competitive? Do I feel like if I had another year or 2, I'm seriously challenging for a championship? Kind of like on the trajectory that Oscar Piastri was on, say at McLaren. Is this, does this team have a good car for these new regulations? That's another wrinkle that will play such a big role for anyone coming into Formula One next year, is this wholesale regulation change where you can't really even judge where Red Bull is right now because it's going to be such a different car and you're kind of rolling the dice on the work that the team has done in the background. So potentially a big decision. If nothing else, I think we'll learn a lot more about where all of this stands or could stand here in the next 3 or 4 days. And there will be a lot more to talk about, I think, on this topic once we circle back and tape another podcast here next week.
Yeah, definitely. And Alex is not the only one. Alex Palou is not the only one that's kind of been around some of this F1 drama, as it were. There was discussions that you heard, or rumors that you had heard, I should say, about Colton Herta over at Andretti Global maybe finding himself in an F2 seat next year. Obviously, Colton kind of played it down a little bit, but didn't completely say no from the sounds of it. But it's interesting because it's interesting to talk about this now on this Wednesday taping, because we now know that Cadillac has their F1 team officially unified. So the thoughts of Colton Herta jumping from IndyCar to F1 kind of put to bed after his finish on Sunday, because he can't finish better than sixth in the championship, and he needed to finish top 4 to jump right in, top 5 to get an FP1 run later this year and qualify for the super license points. And we know that the Cadillac F1 team lineup is Valtteri Bottas and Checo Perez. So, but I guess with that, it's a little perplexing to me about the possibility of Colton running F2. I know some of that's maybe just because, hey, like for whatever reason, maybe because you're in the system and the tires and the teams, etc. Maybe it's just European bias. I don't know, her IndyCar hatred. But you're running into a situation where it would effectively just be easier to score points in Europe to qualify for the super license. I don't know how I'd have to take a bigger look at it, and I haven't had a chance to do that, because I know that we all know there's a window on the super license points, like what you do in X number of years. So I don't know if finishing 6th in the championship, for instance, this year, it's going to delete something from previous years, and where that falls into. I don't know if it's deleting a 9th from a few years ago, or whatever the case was, whenever he was finishing 9th a couple of years in the back-to-back championship standings. But you just kind of look at this. I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility, just given the status of kind of like Alex, what do you want? What do you really want? And I could see a situation where Colton ends up in, I guess you couldn't technically make him a reserve driver yet, because he's not qualified for the super license points. I'm not entirely sure how the reserve role would work with that, but certainly a development role within Cadillac while being an F2 driver would make a ton of sense, because as I believe it was said, I don't know how accurate this is, but I believe I saw something somewhere that Bottas and Checo are on 1-year deals, but I don't know if that's for sure.
There's been some scuttlebutt of that. I have not. I mean, again, I haven't. Let's say this. I don't think I have read that in any media outlet where I would.
It's like floating on social yesterday, so I didn't take it with a whole lot of credibility. But it's one of those of like, if that's the case, and even if one of them's on a 1-year deal, honestly, then you're running into a situation where, okay, you could see a scenario where Colton would run F2 to just check a box and then bounce right into that. But I also know, as you know, Colton has a lot of unfinished business here that he would like to tackle, one of them being the Indy 500, one of them being a championship, quite frankly. Could he come back and race for those if he goes to F1 and all that? Yeah, absolutely. But I guess with all that, it's a long-winded thing to say of kind of what's your impulse to this situation, because while I know the question was presented to him, I think you presented the question to him, and it wasn't a complete no, it wasn't a complete disregard to anything. It kind of seemed like it was just a safe, soft way of just saying, we'll see.
Yeah. An interesting thing that I started hearing a little bit about early last week, as journalists, and I'm sure you kind of fall in the same camp, when you start to hear nuggets that at one point are just rumors. I call something a rumor until someone with firsthand knowledge, even if I can't quote them directly, even if they can't be a named source in a story, until I get someone that would have direct knowledge of something and who is involved in talks about something taking place, whether it's something to do with the schedule or driver movement, I very rarely will mention something in a story or report it or say, hey, this rumor is floating out there. There are a lot of people that love to delve in the rumor mill and kind of just live there and just throw things on the wall, and 1 in 10 things will stick, and they can, rest their laurels on that one thing that they were maybe the first to mention out there. I don't like to play in that area, because I like to feel like if you or I think I'm certainly feel like you're in the same position. If we mention something, I want people to trust that it is something that it is close enough to happening, or is a solid enough a possibility that I was willing to put my name on it, because I don't like being wrong. I put a lot of stock in trying to be right, trying to be accurate, and not just trying to throw things at the wall too much. So I've been hearing enough people talk about this at the same time that we had Colton in the bullpen on Friday afternoon at Milwaukee. So that's for those that don't know, we get probably between a third and a half of the grid every single week before race weekends get rolling. And Colton was one of the drivers that we had availability with for 5 or 10 minutes or so on Friday. And so I asked him the question. I said, I've been hearing a lot of people talking about this. Tell me, please, if it isn't wholly out of left field and off base and ridiculous. But people are saying that there could be a chance where you could go and run in Formula 2 next year. What should we make of this? And he said, I have been hearing that rumor too. For right now, it is just a rumor. So important to see there. That was not a no. That was not that is not true. And as a reporter, you start to learn that when you hear no comment on a question, it is typically because the thing that you suspect to be true is true, and someone just can't say it, or they don't want to say something that could breathe further. A situation where maybe there's a good amount of smoke and they don't want to breathe enough oxygen onto it to make it feel like there's fire. But there's a reason why when we get a no comment, or we get someone that's beating around the bush like that, like Colton did when I asked him on Friday, there's a reason why they aren't shooting that down, as you would expect someone to, if something is being talked about, in regards to them or their career, that it's just patently untrue. So I found that interesting, and I asked a member of Andretti Global's management team on Friday the same exact question. I said, I'm hearing this. Colton didn't deny it. What can you tell me about this so that I can, as accurately as possible, address this topic? And all I was told, which I wrote in my story that published on Friday night, was that all 3 of our drivers in IndyCar are under contract through at least 2026, which again is not a no. That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. That is absolutely not happening. And I continue to feel like reasons why that is the case. Jenna Fryer, I believe, was the one that asked Dan Taurus, the CEO of TWG Motorsports, which of course is the parent company that owns and operates Andretti Global, part of the TWG Global family. She asked him on Monday in a press conference or a media availability about that was centered around the formal unveiling of Cadillac F1's 2 F1 drivers that we've already touched on. And she asked him, look, there are people in the IndyCar space talking about this. It's been written about. Is there anything to this? And he said, I don't have the quote in front of me, but I want to say he said something to the effect of, that is not what we're here to report today. Again, not a no. Earlier this morning, I had a phone call with Colton, and I asked him toward the end. I said, look, I know I asked you this question on Friday last week. I don't know if I don't know if I caught you a little bit off guard, or if you were, kind of just joking around with this, but I want to ask a little bit more directly. is there anything to this? And as he said to, I think, Jenna Fryer in a story that she wrote yesterday, I think she asked him 3 Formula One related questions, and he said no comment on all of them. Did a similar thing to me today. He said, I just don't want to comment on anything regarding Formula One. And so when you're a reporter and you start to hear people unwilling to address a subject, I am certainly not willing to say that this is happening, but I do believe from not only those media interactions, but folks that I have talked to in or around the organization, I believe that this is something that is being mulled over at Andretti. I can't, like I said, I don't know for sure that Colton Herta is going to Formula 2 next year, but I believe this is something that has been discussed and is being considered. And maybe it's been decided, and we just don't know that. No one's reported that yet. But I really don't feel like this is something that just was dreamed up out of thin air, or was something that someone decided they were just going to screw around with the paddock and started as a rumor. I think there are some legs to this. The extent to which we'll learn about here probably in a week or two, I would imagine, because if that team is going to make a change, they're not going to want to wait around too long, whether it's an opportunity to hire Will Power, whether they see it as a chance to be able to promote Indy Next champion Dennis Hauger, who won an Andretti car, into a seat at the team. We'll see what happens with all of that. But I by no means would I be surprised to see IndyCar, or to see Colton Herta in IndyCar next year. But I really don't think this is just some ridiculous, unsubstantiated, quote unquote rumor that is floating around. If someone were to say it's definitely happening, I would say I think you need to hold the brakes on that, at least from what I understand. But I don't think it's something that is just not currently or never been discussed. And so I think it makes it a very real thing to write and talk about, because I don't think it's a 0% chance that we could see Colton Herta in an F2 car next year.
Yeah, I mean, kind of to your point, you learn mannerisms with people, right? You learn mannerisms and tendencies within the paddock, and a lot of that, what you just said, tells me is that they're safeguarding it. They're playing it close to the vest because, where there's smoke, I think there is fire. And in this case, is Colton under contract for next year? Yes. How can this be fixed though? Because TWG, which is, part of the Cadillac F1 team endeavor as we know it. The reality is you could, in that situation, you're not buying an F2 car and buying a whole new team and building a whole new infrastructure for that. It could be as simple as partnering up with another team that's already situated at the front of the grid that could, money talks, right? And we know TWG has spent a lot of it in this case. And if they're putting all of their chips in behind Colton to eventually find that path, then I think you're looking at a scenario where, to me, that's where I could see that going is more of like a TWG partnering with, whomever in the F2 ranks to fund the seat that Colton would take on, and maybe build a small pipeline to the Cadillac F1 team in some capacity. But obviously,
when you talk about the money that they've put in, Colton's everyone says, and we don't have I haven't seen the contract with my own eyes, but everyone in the IndyCar paddock says Colton is the highest paid driver in the sport. Being paid, depending on who you talk to, you hear anywhere from $7 million a year to $9 million a year. And I don't know what Scott Dixon is paid. I don't know what Joseph Newgarden's paid, or Scott McLaughlin, or Will Power. I know Pato Ward, again, from the McLaren court documents that I've obtained through these last couple of years, next year, when he's on the first year of a 2-year extension, will be paid around $4 million. So that gives you a little bit of a sense of kind of where he is. Christian Lundgaard next year will be making $2 million. And he's been making that the last couple of years. I think he signed that new extension with the team in the heading into the 2023 season, I think. And I think that 23 season was still maybe like the last year of what was his current deal at that point. And so he got, like, memory serves me right, I think a 4-year extension. So they've been paying him, and it had always been Michael Andretti's vision that one of those two at the time, Andretti Global and now Cadillac F1 seats was going to be earmarked for Colton, and he's not gotten to the super license threshold yet. It's in IndyCar. If he were to stay here next year, actually, I know you were talking about that earlier. It would not be a crazy task for him to actually achieve that next year in IndyCar. So the way the system works, you have to accrue 40 points over a 3-season straight stretch. So last year was the big pivotal year where he gained 30 points for finishing second in the championship. After last season, so you dropped his 5th place performance in 2021 and you picked up 2nd place. You have 10th place and 10th place performances in 23 and 24, which each get 1 point. So he was sitting at 32 points coming into this season. So depending on what he did this year, he was going to drop one of those 10th place finishes and pick up whatever he did this year. I think I have the table in front of me. So 6th, if he finishes where he's sitting now, 6th place gets you 6 points. So at the end of this season, he would have one of those 10th place seasons, the 2nd place and the 6th place. That gets you to 37 points. So if you go into next year and you say, where would Colton be at the end of 2026 if he continues in IndyCar from a super license standpoint? He would still have that 2nd place performance. Let's assume, although it's by no means is it guaranteed, because I think he's actually tied for 6th with Marcus Armstrong. Will Power, Felix Rosenqvist are both pretty close. So there's a chance he could fall down I think probably as far as 9th. But if he holds on to 6th place in the championship this year, he gets 6 points. So he would have, as I said, 37 points after this season, and then you would be dropping that 10th place performance from 2023 after the end of next year. So he would have 30 points from 2024, 6 points from 2025. So he would only have to finish 7th in the championship next year if he stayed in IndyCar. So again, that wouldn't really take a whole lot. If he moved to Formula 2, he'd only have to finish 9th. You get 4 points for 9th place in Formula 2. So again, this is all based off of if he finishes 6th this year. Let's say he drops to 9th in IndyCar this year. You only get 2 points for that. And so he's needing 8 points in whatever he does next year. So that would be 7th in Formula 2 or 5th in IndyCar. By no means, I don't think either of those would be guaranteed. And so it maybe is just, if this is on the table, maybe some of the stuff that's being considered or talked about is, hey, you could go finish, you could go finish 7th in IndyCar or finish 9th in Formula 2, but finishing 9th in Formula 2 and running on most of the tracks in Formula 1 and getting in a car that's a little bit more similar to the Formula 1 car and running on tires that are akin to the F1 tire, like that's ultimately going to prepare you more than another solid season in IndyCar. And I think there's something to that. Ultimately, this is all going to come down to, does TWG Motorsports and does Colton, do they want to exhaust all of their options on trying to get Colton to Formula 1 if that's out there? Kind of like Alex Palou. Do you want to pursue this to the absolute end of the earth to make sure that when you are done with your career, that you did everything to at least, try and scratch the Formula 1 itch, and whatever happened with it happened. That's probably what some of this comes down to. Maybe I imagine Colton has some say. If he just says, I really don't want to go do Formula 2, I really don't want to do the Formula 1 thing, I have to think that TWG would honor that. So this is going to come down to all parties, again, like Alex, deciding how important is Colton potentially having an option to get to Formula 1 for us here in the next 3 years.
Yeah, and in some ways, I kind of look at it like this is assuming that he's still chasing the F1 route. This becomes a race between him and Jack Crawford to see who's going to be the next American on the F1 grid. Since Logan Sargent did his thing. So, it's it's going to be interesting, and I'm kind of fascinated to see what develops from it. On a
And I wouldn't overlook Sebastian Weldon either. I mean, he'll be 17 years old. He'll be 17 next year. I mean, that's the
thanks.
I know, isn't that wild? He'll be he's racing Formula 4 cars this year in Italy.
Yeah.
I don't know what his progression is going to be like next year, but
isn't he part of the umbrella too?
He is. He's a development driver I don't know if it's in quote unquote Andretti Global, or if at this point, if it's at TWG Motorsports, it probably doesn't really matter when it comes down to it. But I mean, he's a guy, if he starts storming through the junior ladder series, I mean, you could I could see a situation where, and gosh, how cool would this be if Colton goes to Formula 2 and eventually Formula 1. A situation where you could have Colton Herta and Sebastian Weldon in a Formula 1 car with an F1 team that's making its cars in Fishers and its engines in Detroit and North Carolina. I mean, that's the all-American F1 team that I think everyone is dreaming about. Again, that's a lot of pressure to put on Sebastian when he's still 3 steps away from Formula 1. And just in his first year in F4 equipment, but would be a really cool thing to see if you were starting to think about what this maybe even could look like down the road.
Yeah, no, and the I don't know, it's kind of weird to see like effectively 3 Americans at the threshold of an F1 grid when we know effectively what kind of the stigma has been towards Americans being in F1. But as Graham Rahal has said in the past to us, like, They love to take American money, but they don't always love to put an American driver on the grid. Let's. I know we're up against the clock here, but one thing that's kind of related to the Cadillac F1 situation, which Colton is kind of loosely tied into. Yesterday during the announcement, Bob Pockrass of Fox Sports, obviously present for all that. One of the cool things that just kind of honestly I think it got everybody excited was Dan Towers right there with Bottas and everybody, and there was a mention of Valtteri Bottas wants to try the Indy 500, and you know what, like, hell yeah, I'm all for it. Like, what is it going to take? And we were talking off pod right before this, and you kind of got the sense that it was a matter of when Valtteri is ready to pull the trigger on it, not necessarily a matter of if he will, but more of a matter of when, which is super exciting. I won't lie. I'm a big admirer of Kimi Räikkönen, so I was kind of hoping maybe we can get a different Finnish driver in the Indy 500 one day. But Valtteri Bottas is a heck of a driver in his own right. So if there's a chance to have another about to be current again F1 driver on the grid, out in the Indy 500, while also Zach Brown teases another former F1 champion. Maybe it's at the same time, who knows? But what do you make of it? It's kind of fun. It almost sounds like it's inevitable. I don't know if this is something to get too hyped up and too teased over, but certainly it was exciting just to hear the possibility exists.
Yeah, right. Like it's pretty rare over the last several years to hear a driver say, a driver in the F1 ecosystem say, I definitely want to do the Indy 500 before my racing career is over. We hear, when I was writing that story about Zach teasing, some star 4th driver that could potentially be running for them next year, and someone who they ideally would be testing here pretty soon in the off season. My mind immediately went to Sebastian Vettel, who is still in some race cars, has been retired from Formula 1 for a couple seasons. He had said, I think when I was writing that story, I think it was actually close to like 10 years ago, that he had said that that the Indy 500 is, I think maybe he said, like, something that he wouldn't rule out. So, he wasn't taking the Max Verstappen or the Daniel Ricciardo route of like, that is batshit crazy and I will never, ever do that in my life. He was at least kind of leaving the door open for it in case the right opportunity ever came along. But the Bottas thing, I mean, legit sounds like from the video that Bob Pockris posted. And again, I would encourage folks to go and watch that on Twitter. I mean, you have Valtteri standing right next to Dan Tauris, and both of them saying, we were literally talking about this off camera in the last 30 minutes. And Valtteri essentially says, look, I don't want to do it before my Formula One career is over with. And it makes a lot of sense with how the schedule falls right now. I mean, quite literally, there is another race next year that will run right up against the Indy 500 with the Canadian Grand Prix. And even if there's a race that would fall on, on qualifying weekend, that could, that still just makes it really tough. And I don't know that I would ever see a situation where F1 is not working or F1 is not racing on either of those weekends moving forward. So it probably makes sense that Valtteri wouldn't do this, but maybe he'll be, I think, 36 next year on the grid when the F1 season starts. So maybe he's got, let's say, 5 more years in his career at most. Maybe it's a few more than that. Maybe it's a few less, but it does give me the feeling that whenever he decides to hang it up, that this is some place that we will see him, which I think is really cool. I think, any opportunity that we can have to fill those extra seats with, not just, as great as these are, it's cool to see a rookie driver kind of get their start in the 500 and, they kind of get their feet wet here and get entrenched in a team and use it as an opportunity to hopefully find a more fuller time or truly full-time ride in the grid going forward. And it's also cool to see drivers that still are not yet ready to completely hang things up to continue to take cracks at this. But I really love to see when drivers from completely different disciplines give this a shot, because it's a race that, that used to be, depending on, what decade you look back in Indy 500 history. I mean, this quite literally used to be a non-points paying part of the Formula One calendar, or you would see guys come over from Formula One who, kind of were either taking a race off because they really wanted to do this, or you saw folks in the NASCAR world come over and do this. Maybe not necessarily doing the double, because we didn't really see that until the 90s, but we still see some folks flirt with that, with Kyle Larson, even though Kyle ultimately didn't have the performances or the results that he was hoping for. I still think it was really cool to have him over here and just see what this, what it is like to see someone from a different discipline race in the biggest race in the world, and how they can stack up, and a chance for, yes, Kyle hasn't been, he hadn't run other ovals before. He didn't have nearly the seat time in these cars or with the hybrid system that other competitors did, but it's just really cool because we don't get it very often to see opportunities for guys from all different disciplines, running the same thing. You get a little bit of that in IMSA and the Rolex or in Le Mans, but those opportunities are few and far between. So I would love to see, anyone who hangs their helmet up from Formula One come over here and give this a shot, because I think it'd be really great to see. And Bottas, I think, would be pretty high on that list.
No, most definitely. Just because we've pretty much covered everything, and we've only got just a small bit left, but I know you wanted to touch on just a small update, because there's not a whole lot new to it, but you had a small thing related to the schedule.
Yeah, so I just kind of wanted to give folks, because I've been getting a lot of questions about this. When are we going to learn the schedule for next year? As I understand it now, we're taping again midday Wednesday, and all of this could definitely change. I expect the full season schedule for 2026 to be out sometime next week. So I do not expect that to come out during this Nashville weekend. I would not be surprised. I don't know that I would go so far as to say I expect it, but I would not be surprised to either get an informal or formal announcement on the status of Mexico City. Continue to hear great things about that. Talking with several different people in all corners of the paddock, I heard nothing but good things, whether it was from team owners. They were having conversations with members of Penske Entertainment. They said, I talked to one team owner who said he was kind of expecting to get an answer over the weekend, and he got nothing. He heard nothing or was told nothing that would lead him to believe that race was not happening. You talk to drivers and some have spoken with members of Penske Entertainment about it, and they continue to be told that it could happen, that an announcement could be coming as soon as Friday this week. So again, I would keep your eyes and ears peeled for that. I believe this is going to happen. There were some times where I was a little bit uncertain of it, I would say over the last month or so, but I really don't think this is going to fall apart here down the stretch, even though we're still uncertain. But there is always a chance of that. And so until this type of thing, until it's done and we have a press release, and really probably until we grab our passports and head there next year, I don't know that I would say it's 100% certain, but trending in the right direction. The Toronto stuff is still the same as I've reported and talked about in recent pods. Do not believe we will be racing at Exhibition Place next year, but have full confidence that we will be racing in the Toronto area next year. And then I think, the last thing that we're just kind of waiting on is what that last race is going to be. I have heard, there's some pockets of the paddock that believe that Phoenix is a pretty strong likelihood. NASCAR races there on March 8th next year. So that you're probably looking at that either being, if that were to be the case, either running with NASCAR, which would mean that you would go straight from St. Pete, straight to Phoenix, straight to Arlington. That's a really fast-paced start to your season. It would be great to get some momentum going for the sport, but unfortunately, I think you're probably then not looking at a race until Long Beach, which would be a month or more. I think it would actually be more than a month, which would really stink. I don't know that there's anything out there that they could plug in. No, I actually take that back. I believe Barbara will be in the early portion of April. So there, again, it would probably be about a 4-week break, which isn't the most ideal thing when you're trying to build momentum. But the opportunity to have an early season oval and running with NASCAR and likely being able to take advantage of the audience boosts, both in person with attendance and on TV, that's not to be discounted, I don't think. So that's kind of where the last little pieces, the last little nuggets are. Could that oval end up going back to Iowa? There's maybe a small chance of that. I still think, personally, just from a logic standpoint, I think Richmond, would be the best option. But ultimately, that comes down to what a deal could look like for the folks who own that track, which is NASCAR, and if they're willing to give up a date that would work for IndyCar and Penske Entertainment. So I think we'll have answers there in the next week or so. But keep a lookout on Twitter and IndyStar.com, and hopefully have some more news on that coming soon.
Yeah, no, for sure. And we know that there is a little bit of synergy that's starting to build up a little bit with NASCAR and IndyCar, because we saw that the Truck Series is going to be in St. Pete, which is very unique. So that's kind of cool. And, I guess, we looked at 2026 as what's going to be a bizarre driver market, and it very well could be. But in the last handful of days, we've got Red Bull sniffing around with Palou, Colton Herta, who knows what's going to happen with him. And then obviously the big dart is that is yet to be answered or thrown, I should say, is Will Power sticking around at Penske, or is it going to be David Malukas? I guess just right before we wrap up here, there's a lot of moving parts to this. We know week to week everything kind of changes. We probably don't expect an announcement until after Nashville, as we've heard this numerous times out of people in that camp. I guess just briefly, has anything changed your mind about how you feel regarding what your anticipation is, what this is going to look like? Should we expect Will to be back in the 12th car next year, or does your gut tell you? And I'm using the word gut intentionally because we can get all the rumor mills and sources that we want in this situation, but like by the time we're taping next week, hopefully we have an announcement on Will. What do you think it's going to be?
Yeah, my gut tells me that his days at Team Penske are over, because I just don't think I don't think there's any reason why this announcement would get delayed in the way in which it has been, if it's not anything but an unfortunate parting of ways with Will. The only thing out there that I think could lead that to be incorrect, and there's been some theories tossed around in the paddock about the fact that this could all be kind of uncertain and would have to drag out to the end of the season because perhaps David Malukas has some sort of performance clause in his deal where if he finishes in X spot in the championship, he automatically is promoted to Team Penske, or if he wins a race, or if he finishes ahead of Will Power in points, or there are some theories as to why this might just have to go to the end of the year, and why it could literally be something where Team Penske doesn't necessarily have anything written in stone yet. But if it is not something like that, then this follows the same trajectory of the way in which they have dealt with decisions like this in the past, when it comes down to when Montoya eventually was moved to a 500 only driver and got a ride in sports cars. Same with Elio, same with Simon Pagenaud at the end of the 2021 season. Pagenaud wasn't being replaced. It was just a team that had grown briefly to 4 full-time drivers with the addition of Scott McLaughlin, and they were hell-bent on going back to 3 full-time, and there wasn't really anyone else that was going to be on the chopping block there with Joseph Newgarden and Will Power secure. It was just going to be Simon that was kind of on the bubble, and he ultimately did lose his ride, but nothing was able to be announced to that effect. I think it was quite literally like the morning after the championship race. I think that championship was in Long Beach that year, and I remember waking up and having an email in my inbox that Simon had signed with Meyershank Racing, and so that was the type of thing where it's like Simon's not allowed to sign with or announce or do anything until after the season is over with, or maybe Team Penske had, also agreed to say, hey, we're not going to leak and say anything publicly or privately to anyone about what the situation is. And this just feels a lot like those, unless there's some sort of performance thing where Malukas has to actively tick a box that has not yet been ticked to help make this decision. I feel bad for Will with the way this process has gone out. You and I were talking yesterday about how, again, Will has not had exactly maybe the identical career to Scott Dixon, and hasn't maybe been quite the focal point of the last 2 decades or more that Dixon has had at CGR, but they've been on very similar levels. They have gone through so many teammates. They've had great teammates beside them that have come and gone. They have great teammates beside them now, but it does still feel like they are foundational members of these 2 organizations over the last couple of years. And I don't think there's any way the rest of Scott Dixon's IndyCar career pans out other than him being able to tell Chip Ganassi when he wants to retire, and when that moment is, he will no longer be a member, or at least a driving member of Chip Ganassi Racing. But I think until that time comes, Dixon will always be there, and that's just not the way Penske operates, for better or for worse. It's a shame, because I think if Will in fact does part ways here, I think he deserves better than this. He deserves more than a thank you press release the day after the championship, or being summoned to RP1 moments out of stepping out of the car to find his fate on Sunday afternoon after the race. But that seems the way this is all coming down. And I genuinely believe Will when he says he does not know anything about his future. I don't think he's just been putting on an act for everyone and trying to hold on to this secret. Because I think it would have come out in some way, shape, or form. And there are some people out there that are speculating, kind of as we are right now, that ultimately he's not going to be in the seat. But I think the number of people that, if that is indeed the case, the number of people that know that right now, you can probably count on one hand. And those people are, have histories of just not letting secrets get out. Roger Penske historically has things locked down tight. And so I think this is something I think there's a very realistic possibility we learn something before everyone packs up and goes home on Sunday. And certainly I think we will have something that we can talk about and debate about in next week's podcast.
Yeah, no, for sure. I'm going to lean into it a little bit differently with some of the same theories. I know that Joseph Newgarden will be hell-bent on winning his home race in Nashville and trying to make the most out of what's been a miserable season for him. Having said that, unless David Malukas goes and wins the race in Nashville, I can't see a situation where that Malukas is in that 12th seat next year. And equally, I can't see a situation where Will Power would be out if he becomes the only Penske driver to win a race this year. I mean, that's the fact that Christian Rasmussen, full credit to him for the drive. Let's call a spade a spade. If you would have said before the season, Christian Rasmussen has a race win, Scott McLaughlin and Joseph Newgarden do not, that Rasmussen is tied with Scott Dixon in race wins this year. Most bonkers thing that I could have possibly been thrown at, but that's come to light to this point anyway. And I mean, obviously we'll see what happens in Nashville, but I'm going to lean into it and say that I think Will Power will at least stay for one more year. The 1-1 option, I'm going to stand by that. I'm probably going to be wrong, but at the end of the day, I think that we've seen enough, and maybe there's not, to your point, until the box is ticked, until the performance clause is met. Maybe they can't formally announce anything to confirm Malukas. Maybe he does, in fact, have to win a race before he's promoted. But and maybe that comes to light here in Nashville. He was quick there last year up until it kind of got a little choppy there at the end. But there's a chance, and Will Power can hopefully have seatbelts that don't falter in Nashville this time around, and we'll see if he can fight for the win. But I can't fathom letting a guy go that might be your only race winner for the year. And yeah, it would be incredible to see if that really does come to light. But hopefully we see Will in the 12 car next year, and frankly, let him go out on his own terms the way he wants to. Like you said, I think that's 100% how it needs to happen. But yeah, I think that we've run the gamut on everything on the episode today. Per usual, ran a little long, but guys, hope you guys enjoyed it. And thanks for tuning in to this week's edition of the Inside Line.
See you next week.